Good morning. Good morning. Everybody have fun last night? That was extraordinary. And I want to thank the Guangzhou Culture Bureau for making that extraordinary event possible. I also want to signal out Delwyn Gray and Jane Beebe and the entire team at Fortune for making that so extraordinary. I mean, I can't tell you how much work goes into making something like that, but you could experience that and know for yourselves for sure. We have an exciting Day 2 program for you. And before we get started, I want to thank again our event sponsors for making this Fortune Global Forum possible. So our partners, first of all, CEFC, China Energy Company Limited, China Southern Airlines, our official airline, which was quite lovely, I should say, Country Garden Holdings Limited, GE, GAC, Guangzhou Pharmaceutical Holdings, Herman Miller, again those chairs, Huawei, Insigniam, Midea, Shui Xin Fang, the official white spirit, and Yusho Financial Holdings. And then wait, I think we have some more even. Let's just see. It's a long, happily it's a long list. Tencent and Atom Think Tank, of course, and our knowledge partner, McKinsey & Company. So we'll start right off. 2 years ago, our next guest was named as chairman of Walmart. He started out as a store employee, eventually becoming the CFO of Walmart Japan, a graduate of Georgetown University and a Stanford MBA. And I just learned a foreign service expert. He sits on the board of China's Baidu and several other companies. And he oversees the world's largest employer and revenue generator. The company in the top spot on the Fortune's Global 500 list. Please welcome to the stage Chairman of Walmart Stores, Greg Penner. Thank you. Greg, thank you so much. Wow.
Thank you.
So, you seem like such a nice guy. I hate to begin with some tough, sobering news, but after nearly 5 decades, Walmart Stores, the company I just mentioned, is going to be no more as of February. You just announced this yesterday. No, this morning. You announced it this morning. Tell us what happened.
Well, Walmart is going to carry forward, so that's a little bit of an exaggeration. But we did announce yesterday that we're actually changing the name of the company.
Right.
So the name of the company for basically 50 years has been Walmart Stores. And we made the decision that we needed to drop the stores part of the name. And for us, Cliff, as we think about it, you know, back in the internet days, all the internet companies had .com on the end of their name, and that was so that you knew they were on the internet. And we kind of looked at it and we said, well, we're still in the stores business, but a large part of our business is creating this new shopping experience for customers. So we made the decision to drop the stores.
And so, you know, just to get a lay of the landscape of Walmart, and Walmart really is a landscape painting. It's so large, you really have to step back and look at it. Nearly $500 billion in revenue each year, okay? So $485 billion. You have 11,700 stores nearly around the world in 28 countries. You have 11 separate e-commerce sites. You operate under dozens of banners, it seems, that a lot of people don't know that it's Walmart, but it's Walmart. You sell 1 billion pounds of bananas a year. You are the biggest buyer of Halloween candy and teen sportswear, and one of the biggest. I mean, these are like just giant. And the reason why this is so wonderful to have you here is this is the first truly American company, quintessentially American company, that is China-like in scale. I mean, this is like understanding the way Chinese companies grow in that size. You're one of the few that have some insight into that.
Yeah, it's, I mean, we're a huge organization, but our founder, Sam, his whole mantra was, we're going to run the company one store at a time, one customer at a time. And So that we still try and think about it that way, because if you think about it on that with a broad scale you just described it, you'd never get your hands around being able to manage that. So we try and think about it in small increments and how we actually run it that way.
You talk about it as a barge. I know you mentioned that in a quote recently, and the difficulty of steering it. But one of the challenges is the law of big numbers. You know, if you've got a company that's that large, to just grow sales 3%, that's another $15 billion of stuff you got to sell.
Yeah.
I mean, so the pressures of being a public company at that size is, even though you're heavily family owned, is challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is, as a lot of people in this room would know. You know, once you get really big, and especially if you're big and successful, it's hard to move the ship, as you like to say. But for us, Jack Ma talked about it yesterday. For us, a big part of it is being paranoid. So we're at our best when we've got a competitor that is really challenging us. So in the early days, it was Sears, and then it was Kmart, and then it was Target. But we're at our best when we've got competitors that are really pushing us. But Sam, our founder, he really embraced change and forward thinking, and he had this saying called "swimming upstream," and we think when we're doing that, we'll be at our best. But it's hard to move.
It's funny when you say Sears and Kmart, as dangerous competitors. It's hard for many of us to imagine that now. Yet that was true. And if you think about that, if you're thinking about, I think Jack Ma or someone yesterday talked about, Netscape being, a giant company, and Yahoo, these great famous brands. Are you worried that Walmart will be a Sears or a Kmart one day?
Yeah, I mean, we worry about that all the time. Retail is going, as you all know, retail is going through an incredible period of transformational change. And just in this year, there are reports that 7,000 physical stores in the U.S. are going to close. And at the same time, mobile commerce grew 80% in the last couple years. So yeah, we're constantly focused on it and worried about it and thinking about how we create Walmart for the future. And for us, coming back to the name change, it's not, we think the future is not going to be you have physical stores and you have an e-commerce site. It's going to be this seamless experience where customers aren't going to care, how you deliver the goods or where they order. They're just going to want it. They're going to want to have a relationship with a brand, and that's what we need to solve for.
So I should say that your online sales grew 50% last quarter, which is really impressive. And a lot of that is just by the purchase of Jet.com and the acqui-hire of Mark Lohr, who's done a tremendous job as your e-commerce chief. When I talked to Doug McMillon, the CEO, I guess a couple of weeks ago, I asked him, I said, give me a stumper about Greg, please, anything. And, he was too nice to give me a stumper. But he did say that that you gave him the courage of convictions to go and make that Jet.com buy. Talk a little bit about your partnership, if you will, because it's an unusual one.
It is unusual, especially in the U.S., I think. And a lot of it comes back to Doug and I have worked together for over 20 years, so there's a lot of deep mutual respect. But the other thing is we both want to win, and we're kind of low ego guys. We don't care who gets the credit. It's more about how do we make sure the company is well positioned, for the next 50, 60 years. And our company has a long tradition of a chairman-CEO partnership, and that's the way we look at it. So I'm the third chairman it was our founder, Sam, and then my father-in-law, Rob, and now myself. And we've only had 4 CEOs since Sam. And all 4 of those CEOs came up through the organization internally and saw this model working, where again, it was more of a partnership than a reporting relationship. And so the way we think about it is Doug runs the company, I manage the board, and together, if we've got big strategic, financial, people decisions, we make those decisions together. But it's a constant dialogue. We talk daily. I spend at least a week a month in my office in Arkansas, and it works.
And the other thing is that you're young. I mean, Doug is 51, you're 47. You're following these, legendary figures, David Glass, Lee Scott, Mike Duke, obviously Mr. Sam, the founder. Coming into that environment, you don't even have a last name Walton, for God's sake. That's an unusual thing for a chairman. Yeah. So I mean, has it been hard to get the families and institutional shareholders to say, oh, look, we've got a new generation that, are they excited by this youth?
I don't think it's been that hard. I mean, I think we're in a time where the company needed to have some change and needed to be taking more risk. So again, because of this transformational period, so I've been around the company for 20 years and have a lot of experience with the team and the business, right. and again, I try to think about it in the small things that I can impact rather than being overwhelmed by the enormity of what we're trying to accomplish.
So let's talk about a couple of those. So online sales, as I said, had a heady period this last quarter. Globally, you're about a 4 to 5% e-commerce rate, it seems, for your percentage of revenue. That's, doesn't seem like that's quite at the place you want to be. Tell me what's sort of why it's been harder to grow on that front.
The way we used to manage our business was pretty simple. We had our U.S. stores business, we had Sam's Club, we had international. They were these nice, clean divisions that you could run and operate that way. And when we set up our e-commerce business initially, we had it completely separate and found that didn't work because we weren't leveraging all of the assets that we had at the core company. And then we tried to bring it in completely, but then we found there wasn't enough risk taking. And so getting this balance right, and it's one of the things that keeps Doug and I up at night, which is how do you run this next generation enterprise that the e-commerce business has to be closely tied to the physical stores business. They can't be run separately or we can't create these new experiences. But getting people to, operate that way and work together and all that may sound simple, but it is not easy. And you got to have risk takers, and it's hard to get that going.
Jack Ma yesterday talked about this online offline combination, and you've also made this effort. In fact, recently you lowered prices in your stores to bring people into the stores rather than go online. It does seem like it's you're sort of finding your way there. You also partnered with JD.com here in China rather than Alibaba. What is behind that decision?
Well, on the JD decision, we in the last few years we have made some big bets on things. So we made the bet on Jet. We decided to invest $3 billion in our U.S. wages and training. And then here in China, we had an e-commerce business called Yihaodian, and we just weren't getting enough traction. And we said, we've got to try something different. So we sold that business to JD and said, we're going to go all in on the JD partnership, which was different for us because we tend to like to do things ourselves. But we just felt like we had to be a part of a bigger ecosystem here to get our sales going. And so far, so good. I mean, we've leverage the JD platform where we can now access over 90% of the population here, so beyond our 400 physical stores. Right. And then we're innovating. I mean, we've got a service now out of 150 of our stores where you can order through the JD platform. It gets picked at our stores, and then it's delivered within an hour by our partner, New Dada. So those are the types of things that we wouldn't have been able to accomplish on our own.
Well, some of the things about the challenge of you've got 400 stores here. Part of the challenge is making sure that infrastructure helps you manage the supply chain in some of the areas where it just doesn't exist as much in China. Outside of the big cities, Guangzhou, I mean, it's the super wonderful modern city, Beijing, Shenzhen. So how are you working to deal with those supply chain issues in the stores here?
on the one hand, it's different than where we've been. On the other hand, it's a lot of the same. So, you've got to have the right systems. You've got to have the distribution centers. One thing here, food safety has been an interesting challenge, and that's something that we've spent a lot of time on. The government here has had high expectations for us, and I think that's made us a better company, and our customers really trust us. So, for things like powdered milk, baby products and fresh goods and all that, we started we call it the Walmart Food Safety Collaboration Center here, and the whole purpose was to get some initiatives going. One is this blockchain traceability test we're running, where you actually use the technology to look back into our supply chain to try and identify risks, and then mitigate them. And so we feel like we're making progress with those things. But we still got to work at it. So
in a minute, I want to just ask for questions from the audience. So please, think about it and raise your hand when you're ready. But I think one of the great things about having you here is that people, your size again means that you're a very, very prominent fixture in social media. I mean, and in the news. You're mentioned 60,000 times in social media a day. Walmart. That's an unbelievable amount of things to keep track of. In some small towns in America, when there's a holdup, it probably happens at a Walmart. You're in the news all the time. And so, again, when you mention the dangerousness, the danger of powdered milk or something and food safety, you're in a very scary position there. You have to be held to a higher standard.
Yeah, it is and it isn't. I kind of view it as there's only so much you can control in the job that you do, and we are such a big company. In 2.5 million associates around the world and almost 12,000 stores. Something bad's going to happen every day, and something good's going to happen every day. And you just have to. You got to do the best that you can, and you have to be on top of it. But we've got good people around the world, trying to focus on these challenges.
All right, let's get a question. Anybody? A question? Got the paddle. There are people with paddles over there. All right. While we're waiting to find if there's no one there. Alan yesterday mentioned the Change the World list, which, we're very proud of at Fortune. This is a list that focuses on highlights companies that are doing well by doing good. So as part of their core business strategy, not through their foundations or their marketing arms, but really with an eye to improving their business, improving profit or revenue or shoring up the supply chain, companies are solving problems. And Walmart has been on our list all 3 years. You're only one of 2 companies that have been on the list all 3 years for sustainability, for paying your workers more, for really focusing on that. What are you doing here in China on that sustainability front?
The biggest thing, I'll talk about how we got into the whole sustainability area, but the biggest thing here in China is with our factories, and we've got a factory energy efficiency program. So we set an aggressive target a few years ago of getting over 70% of our factories in that program. And so far, we've eliminated around 250,000 metric tons of emissions in our supply chain. So we're active on that front here. We got into the whole. First of all, people always ask this question. Can you be successful in sustainability if it's not core to your business? And I think you can't. I don't think you can have a sustainability officer off on the side, working on projects. But we got into it in an interesting way, which is in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast, and we were on the ground with all of our stores around New Orleans, and we saw a really slow response to a building crisis. And we said, we're just going to go in and we're going to use our resources in logistics, and we're going to bring supplies. We're going to take care of people at our stores, and we did that. And the response that we got to that was pretty incredible. And our CEO at the time, Lee Scott, in a meeting a month later, stood up and said, why can't we be that company every day? And that caused us to take a step back and broaden who we think about as the stakeholders in the company. And we ask questions like, maybe we should focus more on women's economic empowerment. Let's, develop our supply chain to be more sustainable. And we set some big goals at that time. We set a goal of eliminating all waste that went to landfills from our stores in the US, and we're at 75%. We tried to get, our goal was to get to 100% renewable energy, and we're at 25%. So we set some big goals, and we're making progress.
So speaking of which, the Paris Accords, the climate change agreement that the U.S. pulled out of, there are a whole slew of issues in which there seems to be this blowback, anti-globalization, anti-anything that seems that it's bringing the world into accord in some ways, whether that's through free trade or, as again, through treaties. And this has come up time and again in our conversations on stage. Can you talk about what that, what Walmart is doing to overcome that? I know it's a sensitive subject.
It is and it isn't for us. Our view clearly is that open borders and free trade has been good for our consumers. So, you just look at the level of inflation in the U.S. It's been incredibly low for a long period of time. That being said, we think we recognize that the benefits of free trade hasn't accrued to all in equal ways, and we think it's incumbent upon governments and us to address that. I saw a statistic recently that said 65% of children entering primary school in the U.S., when they grow up, they'll have a job that doesn't exist today.
Wow.
So if you think about that, that's incredible. Some of that's globalization, some of that's technology. But we look at it and say, okay, we've got to figure out how we're going to train the workforce of the future. So that's a big part of it. I think the second part is a lot of these trade agreements were written before you had a digital marketplace, before they were meant to spur globalization, but you didn't have it yet. So our view is a lot of the trade agreements need to be updated in pretty substantive ways and be more forward-looking.
Are you quietly behind the scenes making that clear to the administration and to others that you're, how does Walmart lobby for something like that?
We don't really look at it as lobbying. We think of it as an ongoing relationship. So, since the company's founded, we've been through 11 presidential transitions. we work with every administration, and we think it's really important for them to hear, given our employee base and the amount of sales that we have. We think they want to hear from us in terms of what we're seeing in the economy.
We've got a question right there, in the back, right? Yeah. Can you identify yourself, please? Yeah. Oh, hey, Jay.
I'm Jay Walker. Here's the question. I think it's pretty clear that the world is moving aggressively to a mobile-first environment, and that mobile is going to be the platform, whether it's a physical device or maybe in glasses or whatever, that's going to be the dominant consumer interface 5, 10, 20 years out. How does Walmart reinterpret the original value equation, which was always the lowest price, a phenomenal price with cleanliness and friendliness and all the rest of it? What's going to be the mobile age advantage that's going to catapult Walmart into the key differentiation that it's always enjoyed, since scale probably isn't going to be the game, given the global environment? It's going to have to be some new kind of value add that is uniquely and powerfully Walmart. What's it going to be?
It's a great question, and we agree with what you said, which is this world that's looking forward is going to be different. That being said, we believe that our customers still want low prices at the foundation of what their shopping experience. So, we think we have the assets to create an experience that is differentiated, and that differentiated experience, we don't think consumers are going to care. They might order on their mobile phone, but they want to just drive by the store and pick it up. And Cliff, you mentioned earlier that our pricing is different, and that's intentional. We think if you're selling a can of corn and it's 98 cents and it's going to cost $4 to ship it to somebody, it's better for them to order it on their phone, just swing by their store, and we've got a side of the store that's geo-fenced, and when they roll their car in, somebody brings it out and puts it in their car. And so we think we've got the assets and the people now to create those unique experiences. That being said, at the core, the fundamental part of that experience is going to be a low-cost system that enables us to deliver great prices, and we don't think that part's going to change.
You know, we've got 1 minute left. Unfortunately, I'm sorry we ran out of, there's not that much time here, but you also run a venture fund, largely with the family, Walton family money. You were an early smart investor in Baidu here in China. You lived in Japan. You have for a couple of years and know Asia well. Where do you see the best new investments in this area?
I mean, certainly there's opportunities here in China. I think for the first, I mean, I've always been impressed. I've been, coming here for 15 years. We invested in Baidu almost 20 years ago. And it's always impressed me from they just had this mentality of we're going to get things done. And initially that was these big, from a country perspective, that was these big infrastructure projects, but a lot of that shifted into innovation. And we're seeing incredible innovation here in this market with things like rapid delivery that other markets of ours we're going to be following and learning from. So,
Greg Penner, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And a willingness to explore relevant aspects of their product and service offerings. Success really means finding the right way to continually adjust business models in an ever-changing market. To share their views on how to execute a successful strategy in China, please welcome Carlos Brito and Henry Kravis with Fortune's and Time Inc.'s Alan Murray.
So this panel is about winning in China, and we're fortunate to have two men this morning who are doing just that. So thank you for being here. Brito, let me start with you. You've got 20% of the beer market here in China, and for you it's a very fast-growing business and a very profitable business. How do you do it?
Well, first, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having us. Here in China, we started 30 years ago. But really, 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, better saying, we decided to shift our strategy and really focus on the high end of the market, which today seems obvious, but at the time, it was not obvious at all. It was a big bet because the high end of the market in terms of beer was very, very, very small, but that's where the margins were. So, and today, looking back, was the best thing we did. Today, we have 20% of the total market, but in terms of the high-end market, we have more than 60%. And in terms of profitability, we're the #1 brewer in China by profits, by far. And that's because we had a long-range plan. We had the patience to continue to invest in local talent, continue to understand consumer insights, and bet that the demographics in China would change in such a way with the middle class growing, and that the consumers would tend to trade up. And we built those brands up here, and consumers are coming towards our brands as opposed to us, other players that are chasing consumers up.
So you operate all over the world. You're in 50 different markets. Talk about what distinguishes the Chinese market. What makes it harder? What makes it easier? What makes it different?
I think China is one of those markets where averages can hide everything. So in China, you really have to go province by province, location by location, because there are many different Chinas. It's such a continental-sized country. So in the southeast, of course, consumers have a different level of requirements. Channels are different by which you sell the products. For example, in China, e-commerce is developing way ahead of other countries. So channel mix is something that in the last 30 years we saw channels pretty much disappear and some others emerging big time. So that's something you have to pay attention to. China. Averages can hide a lot of interesting things.
Henry, how long have you been investing in China?
We started investing here in about 2005. And today, We're running somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1 billion a year of equity we're putting into the country. You know, when we started here, we looked at one thing. We looked at what is needed, and in those days, everything was needed, and so we could almost pick and choose where we wanted to put capital. Now, it's not just we put the money in and hope it turns out all right. We really operate, and we focus very much on operations. We, for example, one of the things that the government needed very badly was to improve food safety and security. Second thing they needed, which was improvement in the environment and water safety, et cetera. So we said, okay, let's look and see what we can do. So can we team up with somebody here? And we did. We teamed up with Mungu Dairy, worked with them to set up a farm, a state-of-the-art farm, after the melamine problem here with milk being tainted. And we ended up starting with one farm, 10,000 cows, and by the time we finished the investment, we had 26 farms, about 270,000 cows. What we did was, with them, just using that as an example, we started by looking at, okay, what does the dairy industry look like in China? What is needed? Well, the state-of-the-art was missing, and so we brought in technology, we brought in management, we trained the leaders of these different farms on nutrition, on breeding, on improving the yield. So we improved the yield, for example, per cow 26%. We cut down the bacteria rate in the milk by 80% from what it had been. And so it was a real value added. You know, I always like to say in investing, it's not a still shot. You know, it's not a picture, it's a movie, and it just continues to go on, and what can you do with a business? Other areas that were of great interest to us, besides the ones I mentioned, the consumer. The consumer needed and wanted everything, particularly as they were moving from the rural area to into the city, and so we started focusing on companies where we could help the consumer. It could be in consumer finance, it could be in the stock market by investing in a company called CICC, and so forth. And then just to finish, the other area that we're now focusing on, as the country has gone from low value add to much higher value add, we're focused much more today on those companies that need our help in the higher value add, and technology innovation is certainly part of that area.
Can you give us an example of an investment in that area where you found an opportunity?
Well, sure. Ushan is one, which is the largest car auction business in China. That's one. 58 Home is another one that we have invested in, which is very similar to, in the U.S., Craigslist, where you need a plumber, you need an electrician, you need anything that will fit into you can do it online. We do career training, IT focused primarily on an education, both in classroom and online there.
You said there were lots of opportunities in 2005. Is it getting harder to find those opportunities in 2017?
Not
for
harder,
private equity?
Just different.
Just different.
In other words, you know, what used to be, you know, it was like shooting fish in a barrel almost. Today, yes, obviously in the technology area, you have to believe in the growth, because the valuations for some of these growth companies are huge. On the other hand, if we can invest in a company, any company, and feel that we are bringing value add and can prove the operations, put metrics in, help these companies expand overseas, which is really important. I've always said to young companies, I say it all over the world, I said, look, money's a commodity. You can get money everywhere, but why don't you get money from people that bring more than just the money? They bring some value add to it. And that's helped us, because we're sitting today, and it varies a little bit from time to time, but today we've got about 125 different companies in our portfolio, a lot of different industries around the world. So if somebody says, I'd like to expand around the world, we can help them there, and we help them bring governance, best practices, et cetera.
Brito, you said you succeeded by targeting the top end of the market, and so you rode this great wave of affluence that we've seen
Yes.
over the last decade. How long can that continue?
Well, if you compare the high-end segment in our business here in China with other countries, there's still lots to be done. What Henry is saying about the economy being more based on value-added activities, this is very important to us, play well to our strengths, because you have people with more purchasing power looking for experiences. The insight is that consumers everywhere, and China is the same thing, people look for more than products, they look for experiences. So very important to provide consumers with entertainment, where beer and beverages and food is at the center of it, but participating well with other arts, music, sports.
And you're doing that.
Oh, yeah, we do that all the time.
You're becoming an entertainment
producer.
Yeah,
big time. I mean, one example, we sponsor on a global basis events like the World Cup, FIFA World Cup. We sponsor Tomorrowland, Wimbledon, so many others. And live streaming, for example, in China is big. For example, the last Tomorrowland that takes place in Belgium, it's a global event for EDM, electronic dance music. It's one of the most popular ones. And in China, the streaming was done for the first time 2 years ago. And last year, it had 70 million people in China, consumers watching live from Belgium, the streaming. And this year, I mean, next year, 2018, the World Cup, which happens every 4 years, Budweiser is the global sponsor, and we do lots and lots of streaming in China and around the world. So, I mean, it's something that consumers are looking for, experience more than just a product.
What's your best-selling beer in China?
Budweiser.
It is Budweiser.
Budweiser, yeah.
But a lot of your success has been with more sort of craft beers here, right?
Yeah, craft and local beers. I mean, we started with local beers as a base volume scale to get Budweiser on top of it. And now we have what we call the super premium, which is on top of Budweiser. So we have Corona, we have Stella Artois, we have Leffe, we have Beck's, we have Hoegaarden. So all these beers that sell for double the price. So again, consumers are looking, as channels go from the traditional nightlife, KTV channel in China to more Western type channels for entertainment, the product mix also evolves, and consumers are willing to pay a higher price because the experience is one that they are looking for.
Do you own a lot of Chinese craft beers?
We do own a couple of them, but again, China is big on imported brands as well. Yeah. And imported brands, we're the #1 company around the world because we operate in so many countries to bring those imported brands to China.
Yeah. So Henry, I want to ask you the same question about how long this can last. I mean, trees don't grow straight to the sky. It's been an incredible run, but you have to think at some point there's going to be a break in the growth pace. Do you see that anytime soon?
You talk about in China?
In China.
Well, you know, one can argue that they've already had a severe correction. They were growing at 12%. Now they're growing at 6.5% or so percent. You know, that's a huge correction in anybody's mind. But I think they can keep this going for a long time here. You know, the huge population. And again, I say, as long as they can focus on their financial institutions, which is really key, and not let that get out of control, keep the social harmony that's important to the government, I think they can go for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Alan, if I can add one thing to what Henry is saying, yes, the country is growing at 7%, but that again is an average. If you look at some parts of the population and what they're buying and what they're consuming, the high end is going way ahead of that.
Much faster than that.
Much faster than that. So for us, we're still very bullish that there are many ways to continue to uptrade consumers. You can, you know, go from mainstream to mainstream plus. You can go to premium. You can go to super premium. You can go to prestige. So I mean, the number of ladders that consumers are willing to take once they have purchasing power is almost.
But everything is in different size here.
Yes.
You know, and you know, we think of different scale than you have. So I met with the CEO of a wonderful company, Meitao, a few days ago, and I asked him. I said, "So how many food deliveries do you have a day?" And he said, 16 million, but we're just starting to scratch the surface. 16 million. There's no company that has 16 million for the week in the U.S.
Brito, your company is known for its strong management practices. Is management different here in China than it is in other countries in the world?
No, it's the same principles, just faster. I mean, in China, you have to think long term, like we think in other countries. But in China, you really have to take that seriously because, again, we invested in a segment that didn't exist 15 years ago, and today is the name of the game. So you have to have patience, resilience. You have to hire the very best. And in China today, you have lots of Chinese that go abroad, study, they come back. So we're always hiring Chinese in the U.S., in U.S. schools, and they want to come back to China because they see opportunities. And the Chinese talented people, they want to also join companies where they see a purpose. And beer, in that respect, being a very community-centered product, because you hire locally, you source locally, you produce locally, you sell locally. We're very involved in whatever it has to do with the community, environmental issues, impact environment, water. I just came back from Putian in the Fujian province 2 days ago, where we opened one of our biggest breweries in the world 2 days ago with the government. We had a ceremony, and it's a very high-tech brewery, and it's the one with the best metrics in terms of water, heat, energy, recyclability. And that's all because we partner with the government. For example, we are one of the first companies to partner with the government to do what they call the river chief, in that you adopt a river. And together with the government, you try to take care of that water quality.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I don't know if you heard Jack Ma yesterday. He said the last century was about making money and this century is about doing good for business. Has to be a bit of an overstatement. Making money is obviously still important. But is there something going on there that the two of you detect where businesses feel it becomes more important to show your customers and show your employees that you're doing good in the world?
I think you have to do both. I mean, I think this tyranny of or, either you do this or that, that's what it's gone. I think today consumers want you to have, of course, products, innovation, all that, but they want to know what you stand for. They want to know what the company behind the products, what that brand stands for. So our global brands, for example, are very clear in what they stand for. Stella Artois, for example, our global brand is all about water. Corona is all about beaches and clean ocean. And Budweiser is all about responsible consumption. With Budweiser in China, for example, to your point about the Chinese numbers, we did with Yao Ming, now for the third or fourth year, a video that went viral about responsible consumption. If you're driving, don't drink. And he's the main character there together with some other people. 240 million people watched that video.
That's a big number.
Yes.
240 million
It's almost the size of the U.S.
Exactly.
That is a big number.
To your point, Chinese numbers.
Yeah, you know.
But you have to do both.
Yeah, go ahead.
I absolutely agree with Carlos. You have to, we got to do both. Nobody wants to go to work for a company that doesn't have a purpose. And so every company has to have a purpose. We tell the Chinese companies that we're involved with or that we meet with, what's your culture? Do you have a culture? You have to have a culture, and you've got to have a purpose. We focus today on something that we think is very important as far as investing, and that's the ESG, environmental, societal, and governmental affairs. You can't just, in a vacuum, make investments and expect them to turn out well. You've got to be able to focus on the macro and what can you do about environmental issues.
And have you been able to show that investments that have high environmental, social scores are better investments?
Oh, without a doubt. For example, in the U.S., we teamed up with the Environmental Defense Fund in 2007, and we said, let's try a test and see if we convert, say, 16 of our companies to focus more on recycling, focus on waste, on the water usage, and CO2 emissions, and we did. Well, in 2 years, we saved $1.6 billion in 16 companies just by better focus on how you use the assets that you have.
Yeah.
And water's not free.
That's the power of the and.
Yeah.
Do something that's good for the environment and it's good for business. So because it's good for business, you're going to do it.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Anyone have a question for these right here in the front, please? Can you bring the paddle down here to the...
Thank you. I have two questions. One is, what's the American sentiment towards China these days? Is it fear? Definitely not overjoyed, I guess, given all the high growth here. And, you can expand on that. And secondly is, what is President Trump's new tax plan going to impact on your individual business?
Well, let me take the last one first. The tax plan, assuming it actually passes, which it looks like it will at this point, has to be reconciled between the House and the Senate. Carried interest, for example, that is very important to us, which is the profit participation. That changes to a 3-year hold from no time limit before. Interest deduction will be limited to about 30% of EBITDA, and that'll affect. But then on the other side, you have corporate tax rates that are coming down from 35 stated to 20% stated, and that will offset some of that loss in tax shelter that you get from that. So net, we've run our numbers. It's not really going to make a huge difference in KKR's portfolio of companies there. As far as how does the U.S. think about China these days, look, it depends who you talk to. I can only talk for myself. I read what I read as far as President Trump and his concerns with the country. My own views are this is a phenomenal opportunity for people like us, because so many companies need help, want to grow overseas. Example, we were a large shareholder in Haier, which is a big white goods business in China. They wanted to expand overseas. They couldn't figure out how to buy the GE appliance business. So we said, fine, we'll help you. And we ended up doing that. They bought it. Now they're much more of a global business. So we look at it very positively.
You have anything to add to that, Brito?
What I can tell you in terms of how our people, our company look at China. We're a Belgian company, by the way. We're a European company. I'm Brazilian. So, but what I can tell you from our company, when we started 30 years ago in China, China was always absorbing best practices from elsewhere. And they had no problem in learning from others, which is a great thing about our company here. But now, since many years ago, China is now exporting best practices.
Best practices are happening here.
Best practices are generated here and exporting to the rest of the world within our company. So it's a big shift.
Fascinating.
And it's fascinating. It's great to be here.
Thank you both.
Thanks so much.
A great discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much, Ron.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry I didn't get to your question. So before we go to our next guest, I have a bit of news to announce. You will be the first to hear this. You heard yesterday from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau saying that his country is open for business. It's country. I am happy to announce this morning that the 2018 Fortune Global Forum will be held in Canada. And all of you are invited. So we're very excited about this. Canada is home, has facilities for most of the Fortune Global 500. It has a very highly educated, diverse workforce, as the Prime Minister said yesterday. It is a beautiful place to visit, to work, so we hope you will all join us there. And with that, let me introduce back to the stage the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, and Nancy Gibbs, the Group Editor of Time, Inc.
Well, that's very exciting news. This time last year, the Global Forum was at the Vatican with sessions with Pope Francis. We've had extraordinary hospitality this week and last night, a mind-blowing evening at the Sun Yat-sen Memorial. So in the spirit of can you top this, what can you promise this group about what they will see and hear and eat?
Yeah, I know. The Vatican, the extraordinary welcome we've had here. We're Canadian. We're happy to engage in a constructive, thoughtful way about the challenges the world is facing and offer our perspective and our solutions. I think one of the things that these forums, I've been to a lot of various gatherings of extremely interesting, intelligent, engaged people over the past couple of years I've been Prime Minister, and one of the things that we see is we're all struggling with the same kinds of questions of the disruptions in the workplaces, challenges around trade that benefits our citizens, challenges around investments that benefit everyone. There are tensions around the world that having substantive conversations about from multiple different perspectives is actually not just important, but essential. One of the cores of Canada is that we believe that diversity is and must always be a source of strength. And it's not just diversity of backgrounds, it's diversity of points of view, of opinions, of solutions. And coming together and gathering the world at an important global forum like the Fortune Forum is an opportunity to highlight the positive aspects of the path forward and the solutions that Canada's busy putting forward.
So I'm eager to talk about some of the challenges you raised in your remarks yesterday. Let's start out with trade, which was a big focus, and moving geographically. NAFTA, what is the state of the talks, and where do you see that going?
NAFTA has been an extraordinarily successful trade deal over the past 25 years. It has created millions of good jobs for all three of the countries involved, Canada, US, and Mexico. 9 million at least jobs directly depend on NAFTA in the United States for trade with Canada. We know that after 25 years, any trade deal is going to need to be updated and renewed and new aspects brought into it, and we're excited about that. The negotiations any negotiations are going to be challenging. There's moments of advance and moments of greater challenges, but I remain fundamentally convinced that the positive impact that NAFTA has had, that trade has had on the United States, when I talk to governors, when I talk to members of Congress, when I talk to business leaders who recognize the kind of disruption a step away from NAFTA would be, it leaves me confident that we're going to continue to work in ways that benefit all of our citizens. The President, for all the positioning that he takes, he got elected on a commitment to help middle-class Americans do better when they felt that, quite frankly, maybe progress had passed them by. One of the powerful levers to do that is trade that works for them, is progressive trade deals, and that's exactly what we're trying to achieve with NAFTA.
But your foreign affairs minister described the U.S. attitude as a winner-takes-all mindset. Do you feel that's still the case? I
think the current administration has perhaps different negotiating approaches than past administrations have had. But
you have a great future in diplomacy.
I think the issue fundamentally comes down to are we going to be helping or hurting our citizens? And governments want to help their citizens, and I think canceling NAFTA, I think turning back the clock on really important measures that have benefited the United States and Canada and Mexico would harm our citizens, and I have to ultimately believe that that's not going to happen.
If the president were to follow through and withdraw, would you envision entering into bilateral talks?
We will always look at different opportunities. We're ready for anything when things come forward. I mean, the administration has shown a willingness to disrupt patterns of past behavior and look for new models. So we're willing to entertain next steps forward, but we're still very confident in the kinds of support and response that we've gotten from friends, partners, colleagues in the United States who recognize that trade is a powerful driver of growth and benefit to citizens.
So then moving east to TPP, there were headlines coming out of APEC of Canada sabotaging TPP. Did you feel that was an unfair characterization? And what's the status of CPTPP?
And let's take a step back first of all. I mean, we know that trade over the past 30 years at least has led to tremendous growth in the global economy. But there was a promise when we created and we moved forward with pro-growth strategies and policies. The promise was, we'll create growth and everyone will benefit from it. And what we've actually seen over the past decades in many places is that people are wondering when the benefits are going to reach them. The middle class is stalled in a lot of our Western countries, and people are starting to withdraw their support for pro-growth policies like trade, and that's where we get spikes in nationalism or protectionism. And I think it's really important for us to start not just making a case for trade, but demonstrating that trade can benefit ordinary citizens, workers, small businesses. And that's where, when we talk about more or modern trade deals, like the one we signed with the European Union. We just recently closed CETA, which is our free trade deal between Canada and the European Union. We brought in significant progressive elements, whether it's on protection of women, whether it's on and women entrepreneurs and women in business, whether it's environmental protections, whether it's ensuring a certain element of labor standards. These are the kinds of things that ensure that as we get growth, the benefits of that growth are broadly phrased. If we move forward with simply, straight and classic trade deals that focus all on tariffs and barriers and don't think about the impact it's going to have on citizens and communities and people, then we are going to find ourselves in a world where protectionism and inward thinking is the only option. So when we talk about making trade deals that work for everyone, it's not just a nice spin to put on modern trade deals. It's saying, no, we need to make sure we're benefiting our citizens. So when we engage in trade, whether it's trade talks with NAFTA, whether it was with the European Union, whether it's looking at the Canada-ASEAN free trade that we're working on, whether it's looking at what the TPP-11 or the CPTPP could look like, we're very positive about it, or even moving towards a comprehensive trade agreement with China. These are things that we're very enthusiastic about, but we're going to remain focused on not just the benefit for the multinationals and the country's bottom line, the benefit for ordinary citizens. And I think that's something that is an increased imperative everywhere around the world, including here in China, where what has been done over the past decades has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and into the global middle class.
But as you approach, you would be the first G7 country to do a bilateral trade deal with China. Are you concerned about the pushback domestically about whether a progressive trade deal with China is possible, given your position on human rights, on health, on environmental protections?
Every trade deal in the world is, by definition, between two different places with different approaches, different pasts, different stories, different kinds of governments, different politics. And there's always going to be a figuring out how to interface two different systems in a way that is mutually beneficial. And what Canadians expect is, as we engage with trade with anyone in the world, but particularly a country as significant and as much of an economic powerhouse as China has become, and is going to get even more so in the coming decades, they need to be reassured that the values and the interests and the jobs that Canadians hold dear are going to be compatible and fit in within that trade deal. And that's where, when we look at what the directions that China is moving in, for example, on environment. I mean, there is a recognition that making progress on the environment is very good for citizens, very good for the country, even though it's more of a progressive thing in certain labels. China has been a world leader on that. So there are ways of making sure in the negotiations that we're moving forward on a broad range of things that matter not just to Canadians, but to every citizen around the world.
You spoke yesterday about Canada's leading position in advanced technologies, in artificial intelligence, in robotics, and it raises the question about whether you see another kind of digital divide than the one we usually talk about, of not whether large numbers of people have access to high-speed internet, but one between the public and the private sector, of whether governments are actually equipped right now to understand the implications of new technologies, and for that matter to regulate increasingly powerful technology companies that are global, whose impact on our lives is immense. And I wonder how you think about that as a government leader and what that road looks like to you.
Well, I think, first of all, I mean, the shift we're undergoing in Canada. I mean, traditionally when investors and companies and even countries around the world think of Canada, we think of what has been our strength in the past, which is natural resources. And we still have lots of natural resources and great commodities. But we've recognized that the way the world is going, our greatest advantage is in our people, is innovative, forward-thinking, value-driven, diverse people from every corner of the world who are willing to learn, to face the challenges of the shifting global economy and the disruption in the workplaces with optimism and confidence. And that's one of the reasons why we're so excited about the investments in AI, the investments in robotics, the investments in quantum computing we're doing. We know there's disruption coming with the fourth industrial revolution. What Canada has realized, I think, earlier than most, is that if we want to succeed in the long term, we have to be part of it. We have to start leading in that innovation, leading in that disruption to get through the transition and beyond it. And that means encouraging and empowering our citizens with better education, with abilities to code, to be powerful users of technology, so that in the shifting job markets, they can not just have a level of confidence about their own future, but they can actively shape their own future in the technologies we use around the world. Governments, obviously, have a significant role in both setting the stage for that. We've made massive investments in research and innovation, in science, but we've also made massive investments in education and training and R&D so that we can actually make sure that we're not leaving people behind. And that's part of the divide we're trying to look beyond. The other thing, and it comes up, this idea of government regulation. When we ask ourselves, as we see the pace of transformation on AI, for example, and the disruptive impact that's going to have in so many different areas of our not just our work life, but our home life as well, having a government and having a place that is seriously thinking about the impacts on communities, the impacts on different cultures, the impacts on citizens and privacy rights and human rights and all those things is something that we fold in Canada to everything we do. So as we look at how we're creating and participating in the creation of the next wave of disruptive technologies, it's sort of a point of pride that Canada will be, private and public sector, part of that discussion that will shape so much important technology for the future.
You've spoken a lot about the anxiety that workers feel, and there's all sorts of research about the sense of people feeling overwhelmed just by the pace of change that they are confronting. How much are you seeing the rise of either nationalist movements or isolationist or populist movements in Canada? How is that playing out in the face of these forces?
I mean, we have a little bit of that, but I mean, for example, the one thing that, one of the things that we have that is extraordinarily valuable is a population that is positively inclined towards immigrants and refugees. And that comes from, and that's not sort of the government driving that, that's Canadians in their communities right across the country. People are welcoming Syrian refugees, knowing that being able to draw in great talent from around the world is going to create better opportunities and jobs for everyone in Canada. And as a government, being able to promote that and protect that with a strong and rigorous immigration system, bringing in things like our global skills strategy that means that if you're a company wanting to invest in Canada, you can bring in some of your top talent in 2 weeks, get a work permit in 2 weeks, because we know that that means you're going to be hiring up some of our great local engineers, the great graduates we have from our top universities, and creating good jobs for them, instead of what we have up until now, which is recognizing that the top universities in Silicon Valley, where they get most of the graduates from, are, for example, University of Waterloo. So we have a lot of great Canadian talent going elsewhere. Now, with the stability, with the approach, with the basket of solutions that we're creating in Canada that is bucking a little bit of the tides that are of concern to people who play in the globalization sandbox, there is a real interest in what Canada has to offer. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so happy to be here and chatting with all of you, is to say that Canada is often overlooked, but I'll tell you, I was listing yesterday some of the countries that weren't, companies that weren't overlooking Canada. The big Amazons and Facebooks and Apples and Googles are all investing in Canada because there is a quality of work, of innovation, of solution, of quality of life for workers and citizens that is a very exciting place to be and an important driver of success in the global economy.
I want to pick up on something that you said at Fortune's Most Powerful Women conference, where you said that one of the surprises in creating Canada's first ever cabinet that had complete gender parity was it has led to a better level of decision making than we ever could have imagined. So my question is, how do you know it's better? And how do you explain this?
I think we've all been around a discussion table where you have a dozen people around the table and one person is different. Maybe there's one woman around the table, or one person who has a level of diversity that brings a different experience. And that one person with diversity has to speak for their entire group of diversity. The one woman on the panel is expected to talk for all women. It's important to have at least one woman on the panel, but it's much better to have 50% women on the panel, because then the women can actually share the breadth and the range of their experiences that are different from woman to woman, the way experiences are different from individual to individual. And not locking people into a representative narrative, but actually having people share the full range of their experiences and their stories is essential if you want to make sound decisions that actually have the depth and the breadth to have the kinds of right impacts. I mean, when we have a discussion around immigration around the table, and levels and how we're bringing people in, and the impact of the integration programs that we have, and the support. Having people around the table who'd run homeless shelters, who had run nationally successful massive companies, who had been police officers, who had been family physicians, who had been immigrants themselves and refugees themselves, adds to a better level of conversation and a better level of decision making than you would if everyone had the exact same path, because we are serving a population and a world that is itself hugely diverse. And unless we're getting voices that reflect that diversity, we're not going to be able to match the needs and the concerns of the community. But also, we're limiting our capacity to be truly creative about the kinds of solutions we bring forward. So when we say diversity is strength, it's not just that it looks nice to have diversity. It's that bringing in those different voices fundamentally alters the conversation, and the first step of that is making sure that you're including women in your panels, in your boards, in your decision-making bodies, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because fundamentally it's the smart thing to do, and it has a significant and positive impact on the decisions. I mean, there's been lots of studies that have shown that when you get over 40% women on a corporate board, the profit margins go up, the resilience of the company goes up, the decision making is better. You get better outcomes when you get more perspectives in your decision-making group.
Prime Minister Trudeau, thank you very much, and we will see you next year.
Look forward to it very much. You're all not just invited, but expected.
Thank you.
Minister, you know, the Prime Minister spoke at our Fortune Most Powerful Women Summit just a couple months ago, and it was really, such an honor to have him then and now. Our next guests have extensive experience in global trade. Penny Pritzker, as I'm sure you know, was the Commerce Secretary under President Obama, who urged China to further open its markets and extend trade. She's also, congratulations are in order to Penny, she just joined the Microsoft board. The other, Andrew Robb, is a former Minister for Trade and Investment from Australia. He's been on the cutting edge of negotiating trade deals with China, Korea, and Japan. And joining them is a leader in Chinese trade relations, and he's going to bring his expertise from the Chinese perspective. John Chow Chung, welcome all of you. Congratulations on Microsoft. Thank you, Nina.
Thanks, Nina.
Thanks for coming. Thank you. So I think as we sort of get our translations set up here, let me start by setting up this panel because, you know, I think we have to step back for a minute when we think about trade and just think about a year ago, TPP was likely going to pass. I know Hillary Clinton criticized it, but my sense was that it probably would have, she would have nipped and tucked it and stuck it in the oven and it would have come out the other side. So, but we've had an extraordinary shift in the dynamics of trade policy. We now have a president who has declared that he doesn't want any more multilateral agreements, in fact, only bilateral agreements because that gives the United States more power. So that raises the question, Penny, are multilateral trade deals dead?
I don't think so. I really don't think so. If you think about the Belt and Road Initiative, you think about RCEP, you think about the TPP-11, I think there's a yearning for multilateralism, and I don't agree with our current president's approach. I think TPP was an important deal, but I also think it was an important arrangement that knit together 40% of the world's GDP and focused around Asia. And Asia is a region where much of the 21st century history is going to be written. And TPP was a way to shape trade in that region and in this region, and so it's important. And I think that the economic and strategic logic of that agreement still holds, even though obviously this administration is not going to pursue that. But I'm an optimist. I'm encouraging the TPP-11 to proceed and hope the U.S. is not finished with it.
And what does it say about, what has been the impact on the power dynamics between the U.S. and China, the fact that we don't have TPP?
Well, I think that I think there's an impact because I know that China, when I was serving as Secretary of Commerce, was very interested in thinking about what would it mean to ultimately join TPP. And there was a notion that this is something that had momentum within the region, and therefore it was having influence on how we did trade, what were the economic rules of the road. And without that, it leaves a void that allows for lowering of standards in the region, which is not to the benefit of anybody's people.
So Andrew, like Penny, you were very much on the forefront of negotiating TPP, correct? And you said something pretty extraordinary to me backstage. You thought the U.S., or you said the U.S. is a destabilizer in this region right now.
This is my, I left politics a year ago, 15 months ago, not long after negotiating the TPP and the China Free Trade Agreement. And since then, in the last 15 months, this is my 24th visit to the region. So I am seeing so many of the ASEAN countries and China and Japan and South Korea on a regular basis. And my observation is the most destabilising influence in the region is the fact that the United States pulled out of TPP. The forerunner to the TPP conclusion, which the US concluded, obviously, and it's a great deal, and it would have done so much phenomenal improvements, I think, in trade. But the big thing was that the geopolitics. The United States had said for years, this is a demonstration of our commitment to the region. This is a pivot to Asia. This is a demonstration not just about trade and investment, but it was a much broader, it was read as a much broader commitment to the region. Now, there was no real sense that the US would follow through, or Trump would, and pull out. I can tell you all the smaller countries in Asia feel that no one has got their back. I mean, they all have China as the biggest trading partner, as we do in Australia, and the US does. But they like the balance, right? They like the balance of two big, powerful groups, and especially the US with its 70 years of phenomenal progress and support for the world. China and India are re-emerging, China in particular, but India not far behind. And the world is going to change this century, and the US better start getting used to it, because at the moment, every time I go to Washington for the last 5 years, there's been an obsession with containment of China. It's impossible, it's futile, and it's, in my view, counterproductive. We need to find ways to share power in the years ahead, and do so in a peaceful and stable manner, and not repeat history, or some of history, where that sort of power shifts associated with conflict.
Mr. John, what is your perspective on the changing power dynamics between China and the US when it comes to global trade?
In the past 10 years, you've already seen such a change. The emerging economies are developing really quickly, especially in the overall global GDP. The emerging economies proportion exceeded that of the developed country. That was for the first time, and was a major change. And among the emerging countries, China is a major country as well. For example, if we look at the statistics in terms of the goods transaction, for consecutively 5 years, China has already become the largest one, except last year China was second to that of the United States. And this year, I believe there will be around 12% of the growth, with a total number of 4.2 trillion will make China the largest international trade economy. So as the largest developed and developing countries, the bilateral healthy economic development and trade relations will not only impact the bilateral relations, but also the overall economic structure of the world. We mentioned about the world trade, and there are bilateral mechanisms, including WTO. We hope we could establish cooperation with the United States, a more extensive cooperation under the bilateral framework. For example, environment or electronics. That's what we did under that framework. In terms of a regional cooperation mechanism, even though TPP decided to to retreat out of this TPP arrangement. But within the APEC area, I believe there are still some possibility for us to continue this regional bilateral mechanism. So China, on one hand, will continue to promote the bilateral mechanism. On the other hand, will continue to promote the RCEP, especially this FTA upgraded version of regional cooperation. We also would not exclude the bilateral cooperations. For example, we signed FTA with Australia this year. China-Australia trade grow quickly. In the first 3 quarters of this month, it went up by 40% year on year. So it was a huge momentum of demand. So China also signed a free FTA with Korea. And recently, the Chinese leaders have shown that they would like to promote the China, Japan, and Korea FTA. And we also signed FTA with other countries not long before. So China and the United States should dedicate to the global trade development, including bilateral, multilateral, and regional. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Penny, you know, in the United States, a lot of the focus, of course, is on Washington and what Washington is doing. But you've witnessed states and localities kind of doing their own acts on trade. Can you describe some of that?
Yeah, let me step back and a little bit respond to the comments. You know, the United States and China need each other. And, you know, beyond just our trade and our business relations, we have a lot of issues that we're dealing with, like North Korea, where we have common interest. And there's challenges that the United States faces, and one of the reasons why it's so important that our two governments engage on trade issues and economic issues. You know, the United States needs greater market access in Asia, which is one of the reasons TPP was so important. You know, you've got forced technology transfer in, which is a deterrent here in China. You've got, you know, a state-driven market that can create distorting effects where government plays an important role of helping to navigate that or to try and counterbalance that. And there's sectors of the economy here in China the U.S. doesn't have access to, and particularly with this declaration about strategic sectors. So, and what is frustrating at the federal level is that our current administration is very focused on trade deficits, as opposed to taking a broader scope and thinking about how do you level the playing field more broadly. While that's going on, our states, our governors and our mayors are not sitting still. They are working with their businesses to be present here in China and to welcoming Chinese businesses into their communities because it's good for our peoples. It's good for business, but it's also good for employment and job creation and economic opportunity. And I see it in my home city of Chicago, all the efforts that Mayor Emanuel has made to really grow relations with China. They signed in 2013, Chicago signed an agreement with 8 cities in China that has led to enormous growth in the presence of Chinese businesses in our city. I see it in Virginia. Governor McAuliffe, I think, has made over 60 trips in his 4 years as governor to around the world, and especially here to China, working to attract businesses to the state of Virginia. And on and on. You see it in Colorado and other states. So if it's not working at one level, there's efforts going on at other levels in our government. But we need all of it to be working because there's issues that, frankly, only the federal government can address.
And Andrew, as a country that has a FTA with China, what's your reaction to Penny's criticism about the Chinese policies?
Well, I thought Penny was largely acknowledging the common sense and the level of activity that's occurring at all levels, at other levels other than perhaps the federal. Now that's very true in most countries, I think, certainly true in Australia, that they weren't waiting for the federal government, though a deal which which gave us lots of concessions on lots of areas that we're good at and that China need. It all made sense, and we're seeing the results with the trade and activity on goods and services. This is a great disappointment about the TPP because, like Penny said, there are issues with state-owned enterprises, etc. These are, for the first time ever, included in a trade agreement,
that's
right?
Correct, yeah.
And with really significant penalties and commitments. You think about this: Vietnam signed up to the TPP. Vietnam, communist country, right? Latter-day market economy. A very developing state. All the things we all know about Vietnam. Yet they had a capacity to go from where they were to signing TPP, which is the most ambitious trade agreement that's ever been put on the table in the world. And it just shows you, how the rest of Asia is embracing liberalising of trade, how they're embracing trade and investment and liberalising their own economies. And yet, the perception of the US is that it's going isolationist. And the problem is the broad implication of that, not at the local level where mayors and that, there's still a lot of contact which is really valuable, so people get to know and trust one another and understand one another and trade with one another and invest. But at the overall level, so many of these smaller countries, in the ASEAN in particular, they're not big enough to stand up to the US or to China, right? And when one leaves the stage, and that's what the US is seen to have done, is left the stage in Asia in a geopolitical sense. Right. And they feel their back is not covered. They feel very vulnerable just dealing with, a China that's growing phenomenally, and we all benefit from that. But they just want to see some balance. They're not looking to suppress anybody. They want both countries to succeed because we all benefit from that. But at the moment, they feel that America's turned away from the region.
Can I just ask you both very briefly, if there was a change in administrations in the next election, because nothing's static, things change, is the TPP something that you could still pick up and run with, or are there things about it that too much will have changed?
No. It's that's the trouble. A lot of things have been frozen. I mean, it goes into areas, child labour and illegal fishing and environmental issues, the things that were raised by Mr. Chung. These things are in the agreement with really strong enforcement measures agreed by all 12, right? So it's got all sorts of advantages. Now, I think we could, even after 6 years, if Trump got another, it would still be highly relevant. But the trouble is, I think very much I'm a great supporter of the 11 doing it, but the US is 70% of TPP, so it's like a big omelette, and you take 70% of the omelette out. But the thing is, if TPP was approved by the 11 and introduced, it would put enormous pressure politically on the United States administration, and all sorts of things could happen.
I've been around enough trade negotiators to know how painstaking and difficult and detailed and complex all these are. Would you have to start all over again?
No, not with the 12. In my view, we went to the wire. I mean, the last few issues was 3 days without sleep. I mean, we were really...
Yeah,
and I don't see any reason to, if you undo any of it, you undo the lot of it. And it'll be still highly relevant, even if it's introduced any time over the next few years.
Briefly, Penny,
but
and then we can move on.
TPP was meant to be open architecture. The point being others could join if you agreed to the standard, including China, including other countries within Asia, including other countries around the world. So I think that promise is still highly relevant over time.
Please get your questions ready. Raise your hand. Mr. Zhang, what will the Belt and Road Initiative, what will be the impact on global trade?
I think One Belt, One Road is going to be a big mechanism for the global trade, because One Belt, One Road is to enhance communication, trade, and finance, and also we want to co-communicate, co-construction. So this is a direction, and this is a direction that we are heading for, because this is a global world. And then One Belt, One Road is focusing on developing countries, but this is something we want to pay attention to, no matter in what field, agriculture, construction, or anywhere. They need our support and help. That's why it can promote trade or economy for the whole globe. So we can provide opportunities to liberalize trade, and we can see that many partners of our trade that you can see that they're growing. In past 10 months, we saw that we can see that our trade partners increased by 10%, and in trade or in investment, we invest in One Belt, One Road countries. We increase 5%. So this is actually a mutual thing. So we are investing and we are trading with these countries, and they are investing and they are trading with us as well. So this is a free trade concept that we are promoting. And also One Belt, One Road is communicating people or connecting people. And this is exchanging of people, education, science, technology, life science, traveling. When we communicate or when we cooperate together, this is going to serve trade. And I think indirectly it's going to have, we can learn from each other, from different cultures and different economy, and so that it's going to be an open trade, and it's going to promote cooperation.
Ready? Okay, Penny, your thoughts on Belt and Road Initiative?
I think it's a huge vision. You know, if you think about trying to knit together Asia and Africa and the Middle East and Europe through infrastructure is a huge vision. Asia needs trillions of dollars of infrastructure investment every year. So that's a good thing. I think the things to keep in mind, or the concerns that one would have, is to make sure that the standards for that infrastructure investment are kept high enough so that it protects the people. You're not doing damage to the locals, or the local environment, the local labor. You improve the local labor environment. And the second is to make sure that these are financially viable deals, so that you're not leaving countries, because many of these are developing countries that don't have huge resources. You're not leaving those countries where they can't afford to pay back the loans that are being provided for the infrastructure. So, and that's in the best interest of all the parties involved. In other words, to have good underwriting and make sure that they live up to global standards.
20 seconds on Belt and Road Initiative.
I agree with the two speakers. Very, very powerful initiative. It will bridge a huge infrastructure gap, and it's a Marshall Plan all over again, except bigger, much bigger, and the sovereignty of countries are respected. So it's got a lot going for it. It'll be a wonderful phenomenon, and I think everyone should explore the opportunities that exist for all countries in this Belt and Road.
Penny, Andrew, Mr. John, thank you so much for your terrific insights. Terrific.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you so much. So now we're going to take a 30-minute break, and that's going to be followed by our special session starting at 11:30. Please check your schedule for the location of your session, and also just a reminder, lunch will be at 1 o'clock, located in the garden tent, and we'll see you back here in the ballroom at 2:30 p.m. for this afternoon's plenary session. And don't forget, you can take your headsets with you to all the concurrents, by the way, except West River. And please turn them in at the end of the day. Enjoy your special session. Thank you.